emotional and crying, and he's like, I just told the chaplain something I haven't told anyone, and I like want to tell you. And so I said, okay. And he's like, when I was at John Volken, 5 years ago, they kind of did this hazing, so to speak, thing to the new guys. So he was a couple months in, and that the more like senior people there that were kind of, I guess, running it in a sense, had him take his clothes off. What? And they stood around him and like were making fun of him. Now he has a history of eating disorders. He was overweight as a kid and bullied a lot, and so a lot of his depression and actually drinking stems from body image issues. And so I cannot imagine how horrific that was for anyone, but also for him to just have to take his clothes off. I mean, he didn't go into detail here, but he said there was some touching also. Oh my God. And so he's like, I just have carried and kind of almost the exact way you described, like at the beginning of the call, where there was just this like thing in your head, that you hadn't really opened up. Like that's how he kind of was explaining, like, I haven't talked about it, like, but it's just been with me and a therapist outside of the facility. And so I'm like, okay, maybe that'll work. But of course, because they have you working all day, every day, there wasn't like opportunity to go, even if you wanted to. So I started kind of getting really concerned about just that there's no treatment, and like, okay, trying to be open-minded to maybe this is just a different approach that just focuses on like building habits around reliability and hard work and just, again, living without a substance and all these things, right? So that starts going on. I think COVID, so he had to have been, I think he went in 2020 or 2019 because COVID hit while he was there earlier on, I think, when he was there. And he told me on a phone call that they hadn't gotten the vaccine. And at this point, I think it was like widely dispersed, and that they weren't planning on bringing someone in to get the vaccine, and that he had asked to go get, he has really bad asthma, so he's kind of in one of these like higher risk categories if he were to get it. And they weren't allowing him to go off site to get the vaccine because they were concerned that people were having side effects for a couple of days after the vaccine and he would be unable to work at that time. And I was like, if they're worried about that, which I do think is their primary concern, like if everyone there gets it because it spreads like wildfire, like how are they going to work for 2 weeks or longer, So it just seemed like a dumb decision either way. But like that was a whole thing I remember where they just weren't allowed to like get this medical care that they were, whether like if they didn't want it, fine, right? But like if they were wanting it, they weren't allowing access to it. And so I remember I called whoever was like, maybe it was program director was the title, whoever was kind of running that location at the time, and had a very long frank phone call with him about kind of legal rights that people have for choice in medical care, even if they are at a rehab. And then I remember also an early kind of red flag for me was the family groups. I attended a couple. Do you know Christy, I think is her name, that runs the family group, at least for the Kent location at the time. But she was like, from day one of that family group, it was just like a very big point that if your child or sibling or whomever family member calls home wanting to leave, that like reinforcing that that's not an option, and if they do, that they will be homeless essentially, or you're not going to help them leave, you're not going to talk to them if they leave, kind of a thing, like ice them out, give them no kind of resources, right?
Yeah, like they're educating you to not help.
Yeah, and to kind of actively, right, like hold the line, so to speak, with not allowing them to leave. And like similar to like you said, right, this is what addicts do, this is, and so to speak, I just started feeling like, wow, this is incredibly untherapeutic, right? Like my understanding, and I know that we don't know everything, but a big part of my understanding with addiction is a shame, huge shame component, and that healing's not going to happen in an environment full of shame. That's probably the pain underneath addiction a lot of times. And so at minimum, I guess, right, a lot of these tactics I started learning about are like just super shame filled, and like fear-based, right? And so I'm like, this doesn't seem healthy by any means. So I remember he was working at the furniture store at one point, and like, if they damaged anything on accident, right, like, then they had like this severe consequence, so to speak. Or if he was even telling me like, dropping your pencil or something, right? It's not even like a mistake. It's just life. Like, if it was not perfect, you just drop a pencil. Like, then someone could ask you to, whatever that term is again. And then there's a consequence, right? And there's like a whole board of these consequences. And I'm just like, wow, this is pretty shame-based approach. And so anyway, so on one of those visits, there was a gentleman that I guess was on one of these consequences or whatever, and my brother was explaining that, like, we can't, like, don't talk to him, because he was touring, like, showing us around, and we were saying hi to the people we were seeing, and he's like, oh, don't talk to him, like, that's his consequence or whatever, is like, he has to work all day, like, on stuff around the house, like cleaning the trucks and all this stuff, and like, no one can talk to him for the day.
Yeah.
And I'm like, holy cat, like, it made me feel sick to my stomach. Like, I just, like, what the hell is wrong with this place? Like, that is so shame-filled. And like, I can't remember what he said that this guy did to get that consequence, but I remember him describing too that they'll do these things where, if you made a more severe mistake, or I think if you try and leave or something like that, then they'll make a circle around you essentially, and like yell at you just about how awful you are and all this stuff, like break you down. And so just really gross, like, again, at minimum shameful. I think way more on the abusive end is like where I've landed. So I think there's those Komodos. So there's like the unpaid labor that I think absolutely just should at least violate like a bunch of labor laws. Where they're getting no actual treatment. It's just work. Like, he did not get 1 ounce of therapy the entire time he was there. I think for a lot of the time he didn't even go to like whatever group, amongst the peers that there was, because he was driving trucks and furniture deliveries and gone all day. And then tons of just coercive, shameful, fear-based tactics for discipline. And, promises that weren't ever made. Like, they said before he went, he could do school while he was there, right? But then it's like, you get there and they're like, well, you could, but you just don't have time to, because you have to work. So, there actually is no opportunity to do those types of things that he felt would really help him once he was, out. So it finally came to a head, and I'm trying to remember, I think he was getting close. I think he's honestly, he must have been there almost 2 years, because he was just shy of like graduating, like, the program, right? Without any, like, him not leaving, like, actually just finishing the program. And I think at the time felt like he really wanted to finish it, because that's one of his problems, like, or struggles, is finishing things. So I think he just felt really determined to do that, but it was just getting pretty toxic. I mean, it was the whole time, but just at the end there, as he was preparing to leave, and he had like been, quote unquote, like, a really good behavior while he was there. Like, he wasn't getting in trouble a bunch and making mistakes and all that stuff. And so, like, there should have been no reason for him to leave on this date that they had kind of, thrown out there a couple months prior. And then as it got closer, they're like, we think you could benefit from staying like another month. And he's like, what?
This
like, I was
is the
planning
place.
to, and
So said the founders of Salt Lake City.
It was just honestly because they were dropping in numbers quite a bit at this location over the 2 years, likely due to COVID and people, not going inpatient with a bunch of people at the time. And so I think they needed the guys to work, and so they just kind of kept extending his date with no reason given to him for doing so. Jeez. So he finally just was like, I'm out of here. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. And so he, I think this was your story that I read that I really resonated with, because this was like his story. Like, when he tried to leave, he essentially just had to like get out of there and go to the nearest, like, he's like a Denny's or some kind of cafe, and like we got a call from there, and he's like,
when people had a relapse or made a mistake, they actually made them pay fines, like actual money.
Oh, that's right.
So
I do remember him mentioning something about that. And I was like, how would you pay for that? Because I remember
for all the newspaper articles that I used to make the petition update, and a lot of them were stuff from this year, and a lot of them just are missing. So there's a lot of people.
My hunch is like he's getting away with the openness, so to speak, less constraints and rules and regulations of like an actual treatment facility, because there's so many. Like, I used to own a group private practice, right? And because I owned a group private practice, I had to get well, if you do, especially with, it's actually interesting that this is coming to mind. If you're in mental health and you treat individuals with addictions, you have to get licensed with the state of Utah. And with that comes rigorous rules and standards and regulations and auditing that happens annually and all these kinds of things, right, that you have to be accountable for. But my hunch is he's registering himself in a way that is not as a mental health facility, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can almost guarantee it from what I'm seeing. I'll have to look into it further. They'll take this with a grain of salt. And so he's like not having to be accountable to these certain standards of treatment because they're not really a treatment facility. They're like a business. And so then there's ways that they can maybe operate that way, is kind of how I'm curious about, at least. Just for the, so it said like there's all these wordings, right, that chat can find on the website, and other things that say things like residential treatment program for young men that addresses, quote, addiction, behavioral problems, and life controlling issues, therapeutic programming, right, all those words are used. So it says in practice and intention, JVA functions like substance abuse rehab facility, and then it says it was not able to locate a state or national license listing that names John Volken Academy as a licensed substance abuse treatment center. Licensure for such facilities is typically documented in state health department or behavioral health registries, but I found no entry that matches John Volken Academy.